I once had a job at a bank where I was able to do in the span of about a day what some of my colleagues were able to do in the span of a week. And I attribute my increased productivity not to my better knowledge of pandas, because at the time I didn't really know pandas that well. And I don't attribute it to my faster live coding or faster or better Python skills, because at the time I wasn't that great at Python and I wasn't that great at live coding. I attribute it to the following. I had discovered in the first week of working there that somebody had downloaded the Anaconda installer on one of the dev servers that we had. And so I installed Anaconda. I didn't download it because that would have been against the rules, maybe, but I installed Anaconda using an installer that somebody else had provided in my home directory. I did all of my work from an Anaconda Python, got it working, went to Stack Overflow for every error that I had, or went to some blog post or whatnot for every error that I had, got it working, and then on Friday, after goofing off Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I would take exactly that code and just run it with the company-provided system interpreter. And any time where their packages were slightly behind the packages that I was using, and may have had bugs or may have had API limitations, I would target and fix those. It is often the case that the process of working within the production environment is actually significantly slower than working in some off-system environment. And I attribute my 5-time speed up in productivity, because genuinely, I would goof off Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and most of Friday and still get as much done as everybody else. Well, I attribute that to I would work off system. Decomposing the systems that you operate on is a superpower. If you can create simple, fast prototyping environments where you're able to get something going without all of the noise of, oh, the infrastructure group had to downgrade this package, or we had to vendorize this package, or we're waiting for an upgrade on this package, or oh, we have our own internal version of that package, all of that noise. And I can use all of the resources that I'm familiar with, the Stack Overflows, the ChatGPTs, the random blog posts, in order to get my work done. Then adapting the complete work to the limitations of the system tend to be easier done as a decomposed individual task. In a very similar sense, I'm actually quite skeptical of environments where people apply things like auto formatting every time they make a change to their code. We work in a consulting environment where the company provides an IDE for its end users, and on save, the IDE runs black to auto format your code. And it is the most disruptive and distracting thing I have ever seen. It is the dumbest idea I've ever seen. Never, ever, ever, ever set up your auto formatter to run on save. It is a terrible idea because the action of doing the auto formatting should be decomposed from the action of writing code. And the moment that auto formatter runs and it moves all the lines around, you've just lost your focus. I have seen this waste so much of people's time because the line of code that they wrote here and then they saved moved down to here and they cannot find that line of code very quickly. The process of formatting the code and getting it production ready should be its own entity unto itself. In a very similar sense, I'm actually a big believer in the idea that merging should be an activity unto itself. I discovered that merging along the way was oftentimes more distracting than just getting all of my work done, locked in, and satisfactory, and then doing a big bang merge at the end, as long as, of course, the velocity development isn't so fast that fundamental aspects of the problem might change in between. But for a moderately mature project, a once a day or once a week merge is actually sufficient. And treating that as a decomposed individual first-class item actually adds speed to the process as opposed to doing this along the way. Why? Because the distraction of these actions tends to reduce the speed of my iteration loop, and it tends to affect me. You can see I'm doing a lot of context switching. Now, the last principle that I want to share with you is our principle of, let's see if we can get our last principle, muscle memory. This is something that I am actually not that good about maintaining. You see it when we do presentations, and you see that we oftentimes do a good job. Like, for example, anytime I start some example, I say, oh, we're going to get a random number generator. And it takes me a moment for me to pull this up. Here I created my random number generator, and maybe we're going to do something with some entities. So I pull in string, ASCII, lowercase, and it seems like I can do some of this stuff off the top of my head. Well, it's not because I have particularly good memory, because I actually don't have very good memory. It's that I've done this so many times that I've built up my muscle memory. Here's the thing. From looking at this presentation, it is very likely to be the case that you're going to be inspired to go and create a bunch of tools for yourself. Tools like your autorunner, tools like these isolation mechanisms, all sorts of tools of this nature. And you're going to discover that that tooling, like any automation, works when it works, but it has a very bad failure mode. When it fails, you end up wasting more time chasing your own automation than actually getting any work done. And that is the humongous risk of relying on even moderately complex tools. Because think about it. I said that, if you want to get an autorunner, you want to do a very simple autorunner, you might do a while true. But then if you really think about it, what's going to happen is the next time you work on a project, you're going to say, oh, wait, how did I write that while true again? Let me control R, while true, and then let me fiddle with these arguments that I pass here. And these are very fine motor control actions, so it's very likely that that kind of fiddling is going to accidentally, I forgot to close parentheses and all sorts of things like that. Generally, I believe that an important property is to make sure that any automation that you create is itself also decomposable. That is to say that you aren't relying on the automation working perfectly. This is what I think makes my autorunner and some of the other tools that we've built for ourselves a little bit more robust than existing tools that are out there. That is to say, it's a lot easier for us to break the tool into the small parts that do work, lock in what works, and move from there. And part of the trick of all of that is making sure, and I don't do this as regularly as I should, making sure that I can rebuild all the pieces from scratch on a regular basis.